here. I want to welcome everybody to the library. They've been kind enough to give us this space to have this program. I'm Lorraine Stubb from Berlin Historical Society, and this is Sally Caliandri, our president of the Historical Society. In the back, we have Nancy Moran, who's our treasurer, and our guru about the scanner. So, can everybody hear me?
Yep.
Okay, so if you brought photos or memorabilia or anything that you're willing to share with the museum's archive, she can scan it for you here and give it back to you tonight. As I said, I wanted to thank the Friends for giving us the space and for providing refreshments. They've got some brochures there. We've got our members brochure here in the front. In the back, we have the petition that we have been circulating about having something rebuilt on the train station site. It's online, and then we have the paper one back there if you care to sign that. At the end of the program, we'll probably have some time to discuss what your ideas are for what could be built up there. We've been lobbying for that. I also wanted to mention the Berlin Historical Society will have, again, the big barn at the Berlin Fair, and we do different exhibits there every year. I don't know if anybody's been to it, but we knock ourselves out trying to do something very special there every year. And this year we'll have a more detailed thing about the train station history. The DVD will be an expanded program on the train. We've got a big cutout train that people can have their pictures taken in. We've also recreated a whole tavern room, which is going to just blow you away with the authenticity. So be sure to see us there. Let's see, I also want to mention Carol Argosy brought some prints of paintings that she had done at the train station in 2015, if you want to look at them over on the side. And for those of you who haven't been to our StoryShares before, most of these are held at the Senior Center during the day because we find that our elder citizens, of which we are also members, have the most memories about the train station. But other people are younger, maybe they didn't remember it as we do, but they're always interested in it because it was such an iconic building in town. So the format of this is that Sally and I show you a slideshow of vintage photos from our archive, and we'll make some comments about what we know about the history. And then we'll ask you to just raise your hand whenever you have something to add. And Pam Pethigal and Janice Jacobs over the side, or members, they will run a microphone over to you, and you don't even have to get out of your seat. You don't have to stand up or be embarrassed or anything. Just make sure you have the mic in your face when you talk. A lot of people are like this and nobody can hear them. And wait until the mic is there because everybody wants to hear what you say. They also want to know who said it. So if you don't mind, if you could just say your name, because the people in the back don't know who are speaking in the front, and it may be a long-lost neighbor or somebody, and they want to talk to you afterwards. So I think I've covered everything. Sally, do you have anything to add?
Not that I can think of. We always like to keep this very informal, so please raise your hand if you have a question about anything or a comment. Rich, yes?
A question. I believe there was money to refurbish the station.
There was, the state had allotted, I think it was $500,000.
I think it was more than that.
Maybe more, but the state was fronting the money for it. It was not Amtrak.
What's the status of that fund right now?
We don't know.
That's something we should find out. There was money, as a matter of fact, they had started removing the windows to start refurbishing when the fire hit. So if there was money to do this project, where is that money? What's its current status? What's the future?
That's a very good question.
Some of this we don't know, but we're certainly advocating for it. But as far as the windows, I had thought they had removed them, but apparently they were being lead abated inside, and they were destroyed in the fire. And we know people that can verify that. So, okay.
Okay, we are actually going to be talking about not only the train station, but Berlin and the railroad in general. And I don't know how many of you realize how much change occurred when the railroad came to town in 1839. It was a big deal. There are roads that are no longer used. They switched a whole lot of things around just for that little piece of track that runs right through town. So, before 1839, mass transit was either a stagecoach or a boat, perhaps an ox cart, horse and wagon, horseback, or a good old Shanks mare or walking. That was it. And a lot of, one of the big things that was different was we used the river. The Connecticut River was the superhighway of the day. And you saw the ports in Rocky Hill and Middletown, even Hartford, but the Rocky Hill and Middletown were the most popular ones for the people that lived in Berlin. Kensington Center, as we know it, was not there. It just did not exist. You know, you had Worthington Ridge, you had Kensington Center actually really centered around Percival Avenue, Glen Street, where you had Moore's Mills. You know, but when you look at a map, there really wasn't a heck of a lot of development. And every time I look at the Main Street in Kensington, the part that everybody's been complaining about for the last year, that wasn't there. There's a map that was done in 1855 of Hartford County, and if you look very closely, you will see that that section did not exist. And it did not exist until after the train station moved over there to its present site. So we had the Big Dig, 1830 style. And obviously this was spurred by the development of the steam engine, and rail travel just exploded in the 1830s. It started with plans in 1833 for a railroad through Berlin. It was controversial. We were a feisty town then, just like now. And the original route of the railroad was a little bit west of Lower Lane. How many of you knew that? But the folks that lived on the ridge didn't like the idea of all the noise and the smoke, and they were afraid their cows were going to stop giving milk and their chickens were going to stop laying. So they objected, and there was an alternative route, the Kensington farmers along the track. It's really interesting. You can go to Town Hall and get like a running line of who owned property along the train lines. It's kind of interesting. It was the first time that you saw Irish immigrants coming into play in town. And another very significant thing was this was when the clay was discovered, which stimulated the brick industry. So one interesting fact is that the very first depot was not in its present location. It was on Four Rod Road. And many of you may recognize this house on Four Rod Road. It was, the station was actually a little bit further north once they built the station. But this was I believe this was a post office and a store. If you look at the foreground here, in front of the White House and the barn, there's recently, within the last year or two, there's been a modern house that's been built there, and that was the site of the first station. So that was between 12 and 28 Four Rod Road. The land was owned by the Moore family, I think probably Roswell Moore. And Nelson Augustus Moore actually was one of the early train station managers. One of our little pieces of history is that the Amistad captives came from, every day, came from New Haven up to Berlin, and then were taken by sleigh over to Farmington where they were staying. And this went on for several weeks, I believe, and eventually they were able to go back to their homeland, but I think a couple of them are buried in Farmington still. We've got a list here of all of the train masters, station masters, all the way down. So some of you, I'm sure, remember some of the people. All right, somewhere around 1850, the depot was moved to its current location, and this probably, from what I understand from some of our railroad experts, coincided with the building of the branch that went over to, the railroad branch that went over to Middletown. Made a heck of a lot more sense to move the station north. So we don't have any pictures of the early station, the station on Four Rod Road. But this is probably when the new Kensington Center really started to take hold. And the first name that you see for it is Berlin Junction. I love this piece of map. This was done probably around 1867 to 1869. You can see, if I can do this, okay, this is Burnham Street. You can see how the roads have changed. Burnham Street crossed the tracks. Originally, it probably went all the way over to Main Street. You can see Kensington, you can see actually Four Rod Road. If you look here, originally, that was the street that connected up to, this is New Britain Road, okay? This is Kensington Road, this is Ledge School over here. Originally, or so my mother always told me, this road connected up to Grove Hill. And you can see it's marked as a footpath as of 1860, so it had been already, the routes had changed some. You've got a little, this is this little piece, this is Main Street, Kensington, which we love so well. But you can see there's nothing here. There's hardly any industry, no retail establishment. We do have one bar, or tavern, and it's called the Shamrock House, so I don't know anything about it. But it's the earliest known tavern that I know of in Kensington. A little bit later on, you had the Kilby House was over here, and that later morphed into the Town and Country store that we all remember. And then on the other side here, you have what's now Tavern on the Tracks. That was Kelly's Tavern back in the early part of the 20th century, and I think that was built in around 1879, but I don't know much about it. I have to do some research on that. So, but you can see the railroad station is over here in its present location. This is the branch that went off towards Middletown. So, if you have any questions about anything, just raise your hand and somebody will come over and, so that you can talk. Okay. This, as far as we know, is the first station that was built in the 1850s and lasted until around 1893. And I understand, I just heard, there were reports that it was arson that destroyed this one. It was replaced, well, I don't know. That remains to be seen. It was replaced by a brick building because they thought that would be more durable. The Yale Brickyard was just right down the street, and it was opened in 1892? Okay. And then it was burned in 1896. We also had a couple of other stations in town. The East Berlin Station, the building is still there. And we have some photos that show, this was really quite a busy place.
Yeah.
And it is still there, and this is what it looks like now. Would be nice if that could be restored someday, maybe. There was another station in Beckley Quarter. I don't believe that building is still there. It's gone. Okay. If you were around in 1927, 90 years ago, you could take one of the trains listed here. Okay. Another. Now, before this bridge was built, I understand that the railroad was quite a bit lower, and they probably had quite a bit of flooding going on whenever the river flooded, so they raised it up in 1868. And why they call it Seven Sisters, does anybody know? I think there's 8, actually.
Plus, people have pointed out to us there's 8, and we're thinking, why have we always called it Seven Sisters?
Can't count.
Could be. Could be. But I know a lot of people have talked about going underneath, on the other side, to cross, to just get around the bridge. And I can distinctly remember people pulling their cars in there and washing their cars in the river.
We've had people say when they were kids, they played under there. Did anybody do that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Frank Maselli. We lived about 40, 50 feet from that right tunnel. And we did play a lot in there, and the river ran through. We did everything in there. Gandhi slept under the bridges that walked the tracks from the Gandhi camp. And we did discover at the last story time that Seven Sisters, probably called the 8 Brothers now. Thank you.
All right. Because we did have the train station and the train went right through town, we saw a lot of immigrants coming to town or kind of came through the town, and many people stayed. We started in the 1840s and 50s with a number of people of Irish descent that came through, and many still live in town. A little later on, after the Civil War, we got into a lot of Italians came through, including my husband's family. Swedes, Polish, Germans, you name it. It was quite the place to be. This is a new photo to our archive. Sean Mahoney donated a bunch of photos from one of his estate sales. And you can see in the background the Seven Sisters Bridge with the horse and wagon, and obviously the river was flooding at the time. So, looks like...
That's a great picture.
I love it. So, probably early 20th century or late 19th. Around 1891, you had the Camel's Back Bridge came in. There were a lot of accidents as the trains started gaining in speed. When they first, can one of our experts tell us how fast did the first trains go? Was it about 20 miles an hour maybe? Something like that? Yeah.
Yeah, it's somewhere around
So the
20.
when they started, they were going 20 miles an hour, but then as the 19th century progressed, they started going faster and faster. Well, when the farmers agreed to sell their land, they insisted on having passage rights across the tracks because they were splitting their land. And you had to be able to get across to get your, either to get your crops across or your animals across. Well, as train traffic got faster, there were a lot more accidents, but you can still see where a lot of these old grade crossings were. One of them is, if you look, if you're on Kensington Road and looking across to Burnham Street, you can see where there's a, where there's the remnants of a crossing. There's another one around Cashman Place. There's another one around Robbins Road. So these are all remnants of what was there 150, 160 years ago. And just for safety reasons, they were blocked off or not used. This one on between Burnham Street and Kensington Road has always fascinated me. And there's a photo later on that I'll show you where it's really very evident. And when things were at grade height, there were chances of people getting seriously injured or killed. That one on the bottom is across from the church where Rockland Dairy used to be. Okay. And this is another neat picture from probably the 1880s. Looks like a rogues gallery. I love those mustaches and the bowler hats.
Hold on,
We've got hands up.
Oh, okay.
The station sign that you just saw, right there,
Yeah.
that ended up in New Britain. It was at Whiting Street, and at Whiting Street there was a freight house, and in the yard was a scale house where they weighed railroad cars. And the station at that time probably had 4 signs like that, and one of them ended up on the scale test house in New Britain, and probably morphed into Gordon Allen's collection, which still exists, but it's scattered around up in New Hampshire now. But who knows, we tried to go to the auction several years ago to see if it was there, but it wasn't.
Well, maybe someday we can get it back to Berlin. That would be great.
Going to my collection.
Hi, this is John. Some of you know me, some of you don't. When it came to grade crossings in my research for the book, I'm almost completed. I think there was a referendum or a town meeting, approximately 1839, if I recollect, about taking the crossing out at Framingham Avenue. And the reason why was because the trains were going faster and we were having accidents. There's also some stories somewhere about, I think, the first bridge being that. It'll turn off.
Thank you.
That will turn it off.
I think the mic went off.
Talk loud, John.
Anyway, without the mic, there was also some kind of story somewhere I heard about the fact that when the first bridge or underpass was put in, there was already a problem with the height of vehicles. Farmers with hay wagons that were stacked really high had a problem with it. And the reason for the great big dip in the road there is because, well, when it was made an overpass, they had to dig down too because in order to gain the height.
Right.
Thank you.
Right. Okay.
Let's see.
This is a shot.
Oh my gosh.
Look, I think this is looking south. Oh, they're all done? I found a story, I think it was in the Current, about the blizzard of 1888, where you had 15 people that got stuck at the station. Okay, here we go. For 2.5 days before they were dug out. So That would have been an interesting time. Okay. And again, judging by the hat, this is probably late 19th, early 20th century. So, one of the locomotives at the time all had names, and one of them was named Berlin. So I'm not sure if this is the one or not, but.
No, that one's much later.
Okay. Okay. All right, so February 26, 1896, we had a fire that destroyed the first brick station. And there might have been some salvage. That one, I'm not sure if the cause was a lantern perhaps, or something. I don't know. I wasn't able to find out. Then again in 1900, there were fierce lightning storms all around, and the station burned. You had the telegraph operator who was struck by lightning at the same time. The damage was such that they were able to reuse the walls. They said they were sound. I've heard some things since then that maybe question that. But the thought was, let's rebuild in the same footprint. So these are some photos. What's really eerie is the similarity between the photos then and the photos from last winter. These are all. And this is, I believe, the rebuilt station. Okay, little piece of what Berlin looked like, Kensington looked like in 1908. The building on the right is the Kilby House that was later moved a little bit further north to become part of the Town and Country Store.
That's where the Dairy Queen is right now.
Right. But some of the buildings that you see in the photo are still there. They look a little different, but they're still there. Here's another view of Kensington Center back around the turn of the century. The structure towards the back of the picture is a big water tower. So, that's another one. Good old Berlin Savings Bank on the right. And this one is 1932. One of the interesting things when, once the railroad station was in place, in the 20s they started talking about the need to have a high school in Berlin. And one of the reasons why the Kensington, the Jeannie Hooker School was built was because you had easy access from all parts of town. If you lived in Beckley Quarter, you could take the train from Beckley or East Berlin over to Kensington. If you lived near the Ridge, you could take the trolley and get over there, and then just walk from the station or from Upson's Corner, the trolley stop, to get to the high school. So it was much easier for students than to have to go out of town if they wanted to continue their education. So here we have some nice old shots of what it looks like.
When you think about it, it had not changed much at all except for paint. Like back then, it was stained wood.
Right. You can see the tin ceiling. I'd love to know who some of these people are.
Max Sogenheim is this agent, I think, leaning up by the ticket window.
Okay.
I think you're right.
Yeah.
Max is still in town, Wilcox Cemetery.
All right. Okay. He's never leaving. Okay. Now this is an interesting photo. got this copy. The original painting is in the water department in the Kensington Fire District off of Farmington Avenue. And we've had some discussion about where it was. Originally, they thought that the name might be Stove Street, but then when you look at down the bottom here, to me that looks like Grove Street. But anyway, it says Railroad Pond. There's a date of 1784 in Kensington. We don't know who did the painting. The railroad pond wasn't built until 1903. The house, I have no idea where. I do think that this could have gone over the river by Grove Hill, crossed the river by Grove Hill. That stretch of Kensington Road that connected up with Grove Hill, that's a possibility. I don't know. There's nobody here from 1784 to tell us. If anybody, there's a hand up back there.
Hi. Hi. I just have a question about what was the purpose of a railroad pond?
Water for the steam engines.
Oh, thank you.
Okay? That's what I've always been told anyway. Huh?
Yeah, towers, they,
Right.
the steamers.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we saw the tower in a previous
A
slide.
couple of pictures that we had.
There's a hand up back there.
No, Mike. The railroad pond, one of the reasons it was there is Berlin had a powerhouse because it had a third electric railroad that ran between Berlin and Plainville. So the water was piped down to the powerhouse, which became Eastern Parlor Frame at one time in history. And they had bought electric trolley cars from Nauset Beach in Rhode Island and used them between the 2 points until people started stepping on the third rail.
That was not very healthy. All right, we got a couple of other pictures of the railroad pond from long, long ago. The town came into possession in 1961, thanks to Marjorie Moore's a grant from her. There's another one. Okay. This is looking north from the pond.
That house is right above the old Peck Library, where the museum is. It's got that peak on top.
Right. The house was built by Milo Hotchkiss somewhere around 1840. And there was an earlier house that I think was a little bit in front of it that was built by the Norton family, and that was one of the original Norton houses from what I understand. And that was demolished sometime around 1820, 1830 from what I recall from my reading. Okay, another picture of the dam.
I think the last session we did of this, there was discussion in town recently about whether they should, because the dam is in need of repair, and the town was considering whether they should repair it or disassemble it and drain the pond. And of course, we lobbied, like, we don't want that destroyed, so they are going to repair it because the cost was essentially the same. But they're going to add something to it. They're talking about doing a fish ladder, which would be really cool, like they're doing down at Stan Chem in East Berlin. Because originally there would have been migratory fish going up that way.
So maybe someday you'll be able to catch salmon. in Railroad Pond, that would be cool. Now, this is one of my all-time favorite photos. This is the Seven Sisters. This is Kensington Road looking south, and the road itself is off to the right, the dirt road, and I think you can just barely see some of the Berlin Iron Bridge, the Iron Bridge abutments that some of us still can remember. But if you also look back here, you can kind of see Burnham Street crossing, okay? And exactly where it went from there, I don't know, but I always wonder. So. But you can also see over here another little back way that people would go. If you're on Four Rod Road and you don't want to go all the way around, you just cross the river, ford the river and come out this way. So this was done in 1907, this photo. So okay, here we have our engine house. The water tower, this is Depot Road. And I believe this is, I think this is where Tavern on the Tracks is. This restaurant was on Depot Road. I believe this is the Ivano family, I think. That had their, I'm not sure how long they had the restaurant.
Yeah, that's Mr. Ivano, Pete Ivano and his wife. That restaurant is long gone, but he started another restaurant called the Star Restaurant.
Oh, that was
Remember
there
that?
for years.
He took that over, and the son Joe and Rose ran it for years.
Right.
But it's right now it's a little diner, and the septic tank system is right next door in that same building.
Okay. Wonderful. Okay. And we all remember the underpass flooding. This is from 1929, 28 or 29, I believe. So,
Did anybody have an experience getting stuck in there? Yes?
Yes.
I thought somebody was saying yes. Oh, way back.
Yes. Luckily, it wasn't that much water that day.
In 1929?
No, the day, I was stuck here with my mother. Sorry.
It took them a long time to get there. And trucks hit the bridge and then you had to flood.
right, right. Here's another old one looking the other way, or well, looking a little, from a little bit further north, and you can see the Kilby House on the right, and then Central Garage, or what would become Central Garage, there. And some of the other stores, which I don't, the names escape me now. You had the Pentori's grocery store over on the left.
For the ladies.
Fogliati's.
Sarah.
Just a little tidbit, not necessarily rare release, but it's now Black Rock service, and if you happen to spend enough time looking at the building, you will notice a red Pegasus, I believe, just barely visible. It was apparently, they sold asphalt gasoline at one time, or Volvo, excuse me.
Volvo.
Thanks, I said corrected.
Yeah, Wes Dickinson owned that garage for quite a while. He was Lauren Dickinson's father, for those of you who've been around for...
Yeah, Wes Dickinson for years, and I noticed something going by there the other day, that free air for our bicycles is still on the wall if you look close here. The little crank air pump.
Huh, that's cool. We've got some interior shots of the station from long ago.
That telegraph window was still, I took that not long before it burned down.
Yeah, that was the 100th anniversary.
And the stained glass. Some more?
I like these moody shots.
Yeah. There was
Sally,
some,
oh, Sally.
Well, you got this picture, I'll tell you a story. I told it last time I was here, so bear with me, it'll take a couple hours. My name is Gary Gursky. I grew up in town, went to high school here, and grade school, that sort of thing. 1970, I hired out on the railroad. So I was in this area, this is where I got my paycheck. And I worked in New Brighton, Berlin, Hartford, and all around this area,
What was the railroad then?
Penn Central. Then, by the end of the 70s, I decided I wanted to be a locomotive engineer. So I went to engineering school in New Haven. And I was learning how to run a passenger train. And one of the first times I ran a passenger train was to come this way through Berlin, from New Haven to Springfield. And we were using a couple of blood cars, RDCs. You probably remember them. They were stainless steel, self-propelled cars that went through here. So we're coming along. We go come up to Meriden, and we're going to leave Meriden. We're a little late, so we're going to make up some time. When you get to Silver Lake, between Silver Lake and Newington Junction, it's basically downhill. So we can come up to Silver Lake and make up our time coming down to Berlin Station. So I was running a train, engineers wandering around, the conductor's out back somewhere. So I'm moving right along. The speed limit at that time was 60 miles an hour. And I was going a little bit above that. I come down to Camel's Back, and that's where you put the brakes on to stop at the station. So I started to wind the brakes on at Camel's Back, and I realized that I wasn't going to be able to stop for the station. So I got to the station, and I put the cab window down, and I yelled out that I'd be right back. So I looked out the window, and I knew everybody. So I got down about 50 yards, and we stopped, and I shoved back to the station. Tried to spot the doors up of the train with the doors of the station. People got on board, I got the signal to go ahead, and away we went. A minute or so, I heard a knock on the cab door, and I looked, and it's my high school teacher, Mrs. Murphy. Now, our history went back a long way. I asked her to go to the prom with me because I was failing everything, and that was my key. Mrs. Murphy's husband was a conductor on a railroad. She knew everybody, and I'm sure she was a little surprised to see me hanging out the window yelling, "I'll be right back." She knocks on the cab window, comes up and asks me very nicely, "Mr. Gursky, did you swipe this train?" That's it.
Charlie Murphy.
Oh, God.
oh, thanks, Gary. You're always good for a good story. Oh. All right, one of the interesting things about this station is it's been the place where there were many, many wonderful returns and hellos and goodbyes at the station. Many of us can tell stories about people coming and going, soldiers coming in to and from during World War II, Korea, even Vietnam. There's so many stories to be told. You know.
This happens to be Bob Zipadelli and his uncle, I believe.
So.
Wow.
Sally?
Yeah.
I'd like to make a comment on this picture. This is a picture of my family, my grandfather, my father, and all my uncles. And they're seeing their youngest son or youngest brother off to war, the one in the middle in the uniform, my Uncle Marty and my godfather. the guy down in front is my Uncle Frank, who ran the Main Street package store. Well, anyway, he did go off to war and saw combat in the South Pacific. And the sad story was another guy from town, Lino Gironi, was killed alongside him on an island in the Pacific. But this picture I submitted to the thing, and I'm so glad that they showed it. Thank you.
Thank you for donating that, Mr. Maselli.
Wow.
Another flood. This one's during the 60s, I can tell from the 60, I think that looks like a 60 Chevy over on the right. Okay. Well, this station made it for 100 years. We had quite a celebration in the year 2000. A lot of people, I think they had like 1,000 people that came.
And I think it was the Garden Club and the Historical Society orchestrated this, and they had no idea the response they would get. And there were about 1,000 people showed up that day. It was incredible.
Oh, nice.
That's Bill's sample and the ladies.
Okay.
That's Bill's sample recreating a similar photo with Max Schugenheim in the same pose.
All right. It's under a different name now. I think it's Tavern on the Tracks. But the building is still there, and this building goes back to, I think it's 1879. So it's been around for...
They've done a nice job renovating it too.
Yeah, they have. This is the recent fire. The cause is still listed as undetermined. But you can see the similarities from the 1900 fire to now. It's so similar, it's eerie. And we end with a little poem. I see the old train station, its platform filled with carts, where once old friends and neighbors stood, expectant joy in their hearts. It seems I hear the laughter that filled the waiting room. I could swear I see bright faces still shining through the gloom. How many joyous greetings there, how many sad farewells were muffled in the hiss of steam or the clamor of the bells. All too many institutions such as this are fading fast. These new modern innovations are blotting out the past. But memory still gives to me a most welcome invitation to journey to a bygone day when I see an old train station. And that's by John Hagen. So we still have our memories, which is always a good thing.
Okay, I think we can turn the lights on, and that's the end of the slideshow, but we can kind of talk a little bit about the fire and what you'd like to see happen up there. I know the Historical Society has been, initially we were advocating to rebuild, but that would probably, in this environment, not be financially a possibility. But we're thinking about having something built that would evoke an old station and maybe house memorabilia that we've saved, including bricks that are being saved for that purpose, and maybe have a Triton diorama, a tourist information thing, a cafe, something. We have a lot of ideas, but does anybody else have ideas?
No, that's okay. Hi, I'm Rick Stool. I'm kind of new to this town. And I'd like the guy that opened up had asked the very first question about the grant from the state. It was $2 million, I think. At least that's what I heard. And you just were talking about fiscal, not having enough money. If the state appropriated that grant, I mean, what, are they just gonna conveniently dump it back into the budget? I mean,
Well, they
it would seem to
haven't-
me that you should get that and use it.
Well, a lot of it is like they're trying to still determine the cause, and our local fire marshal has said this is the most complicated case he's ever seen, because there's so many contractors involved in it, and they all have their investigative teams, they all have their own lawyers, and until you can assess blame and who would pay for this, like, no decisions are being made. But that's definitely something, if that money was in place, that we'd like to see it used to rebuild something.
Yeah, I don't understand, because it's like, whether they have their lawyers and blame, it doesn't matter. We still have the money donated to rebuild the station. It just shouldn't go away.
There's got to be insurance involved too, right?
Was there insurance on the building?
Amtrak owned the building and they self-insured, and they had a huge deductible, so they are not, I cannot see them rebuilding it. But is it? But assuming something could be rebuilt up there, what would you like to see? I know we all like to see the whole station rebuilt again exactly the way it was supposed to be. John?
With a little bit of knowledge of the situation, which I won't get into. At the most, maybe something 1/4 the size. There was proposals or just talking among groups in town about putting a small, like, restaurant or cafe in there, and having one section be that, and the other section be like a place where you could look at the photos and slides, maybe something in a kiosk and so on and so forth. I don't, there's a lot of, I don't know, there's a lot of things involved with it, and obviously the investigation is going to have to be finished before they do anything. Thank you.
I know we have a lot of great photos, and we got more today from Linda Niles, took some beautiful photos. But I just envision these being blown up, and so you could see what it looked like in there, even though we can't completely recreate that. I know we've been talking a lot to the Economic Development Commission, because I'd like to see something up there also. They just don't want to, nobody wants to see this just paved over like blacktop. That would just be so hurtful to us. So I don't know, that was so key to the downtown development too, because it was like the whole theme of like being this old train station that would attract people here to see that. I know there'll probably be a lot of people because of the new structure, but it really doesn't have the ambience of what the old station had. I don't know, anybody else have any thoughts? Gary?
Up in New Hampshire, I live in New Hampshire now, and there's a company up there, actually two of them, that build replica stations, country stations. At one time in history, Sears Roebuck built railroad stations in towns would buy them, and they'd come as a kit. And Canadian Railroads, Canadian Pacific, and National built standard railroad stations all over their systems. So we have some around our lake. There's some abandoned tracks around Winnipesaukee. There's 3 of them now. But they look like a country station, just modernized, and that might be something to think about, to put a collection of really interesting things in.
Anybody else have anything they want to say? Well, we can all talk informally too. You're welcome to hang around a little bit and have some refreshments. And we have the petition up here if you'd like to sign that. We have our membership brochure. Anything else? We thank you for coming.
You're right.